California was once a pioneer in tough-on-crime policies. The public repeatedly backed serious sentencing for violent criminals. Most famously, the Three Strikes Law, which permanently incarcerates people who prove incapable of reform. But California has changed. Progressives have assumed full control of every branch of California government and are now systematically dismantling these laws. Their idealism is aiding and abetting criminals. Their campaign has found its most extreme expression in the Racial Justice Act.
It is an act that is primed to take down the possibility of any criminal justice in California. It is based on the idea that the entirety of California's criminal justice system is infected by bias against Black defendants.
The Racial Justice Act runs on a familiar logic. A racial disparity in arrest or incarceration rates for a particular crime is proof positive of systematic racism. The disparity alone proves that there's bias in the system.
If you assume that all groups commit crime at equal rates, and then you see that there are disparate rates of incarceration, well, there must be racism.
It's about recognizing systemic racism in our system. It is time to establish a policy that makes it unlawful to discriminate against people of color in our criminal justice system.
The Racial Justice Act hands criminals a new tool for defending themselves. Simply showing a disparity in the way their offense has been prosecuted in the past forces the system to reconsider their case.
So if a defendant comes into court and says, previously other defendants were not treated fairly, you have to throw out my present conviction. I get to be sprung from prison. What you're not allowed to say in the world of the Racial Justice Act in California is that the reason that Blacks are disproportionately incarcerated is because they commit crime disproportionately. In California as a whole, Blacks commit homicide at 11 times the rate of whites and Hispanics combined. In Los Angeles, Blacks commit violent crime at 21 times the rate of whites. How do we know this? Is this the racist cops that just have a vendetta against Blacks? The reason we know these figures is what the witnesses to and victims of violent street crime tell the cops. And those victims and witnesses are themselves overwhelmingly minority.
This is about the murder of my son.
That was my baby boy.
And the bullet hit him inside his lungs.
They have ruined my life forever.
The Racial Justice Act is now being applied right here, in the East Bay outside of San Francisco, a place plagued with unrelenting gang violence.
One of the most vicious gang wars between a gang called Case and a gang called ENT. ENT is the last name letters of 3 homies who'd been gunned down.
The warring gangs are responsible for several murders and countless shootings.
There were so many shootings, officers were racing to get from one to the next.
There was a poor guy, Donze Young. He was walking down the street. A gunman appeared out of nowhere, chased him down the street, gun blazing, and the gunman stood over him and proceeded to empty the cartridge into Donze Young, killing him.
When Donze Young was found shot to death in Antioch last August, it led to the unraveling of a war between rival gangs.
2 days later, there was yet another outbreak, people shooting each other at gas stations. In that case, the victim was pistol whipped in addition to being shot. And then there was a case in another quiet residential street where there'd been a mystery car parked on the street for a while. And finally, 2 guys walked out of a house and the car speeded towards them, was shot through the car, and eventually the driver died. Finally, a massive law enforcement effort developed. 28 law enforcement agencies up and down California and in Nevada collaborated to try and take down the players in the Case ENT gang war. It was successful. They arrested dozens of juveniles and adults for robberies, for burglaries, for drive-by shootings.
36 adult members of the ENT and Case criminal street gangs were identified, along with 15 juveniles.
Thanks to the Racial Justice Act, the fruits of that were dismantled. 4 gang members from the ENT gang who were involved in this drive-by shooting were convicted, and because their criminal histories were so bad, they were given life without parole sentences. The prosecutors thought, game over, we won. The Racial Justice Act allows defendants to challenge their sentencing. Their argument under the Racial Justice Act was that in the past, Black defendants were more likely to receive life without parole than non-Black gang murderers. And that was the case that allowed them to now reopen their life without parole sentences. So that's been thrown out. In 2014, in Antioch, California, at an apartment complex, 2 gang murderers killed a guy because the prosecutor played their rap gang videos to show that they were in fact members of gangs.
Female, smoke her ass, leave her dead before she tell. Well, you the day before Christmas, got her last shot. Me and my shooters, we some monsters. Love dropping shots, but it be on my conscience.
The argument was, well, this triggered the jury's implicit bias against Black defendants. Case gets reopened. The chance that there are going to be witnesses still available and willing to testify is virtually zero. In one case, there was a federal felon who was on probation in San Francisco. This guy is such a bad dude that if he gets stopped by a police officer, that police officer has an automatic entitlement to search his car. So he was stopped in a high crime area of San Francisco. The officer first ran the plates, said that the plates didn't match the car, found that he had a loaded handgun in his car, violation of every term of probation you can possibly imagine, and arrested him for unlawful possession. Enter the Racial Justice Act, that because the officer had used the phrase high crime area in his police report, the defense brought in a racial justice expert named Dante King, who testified that the term high crime area is racially biased. Dante King, who a year or two later was giving a speech in which he called whites as pathological.
Whites are psychopaths.
You know, whites are pathologically evil, inherently so.
I see terrorism. I see psychopathy.
That's the race experts who are now being brought in to testify in Racial Justice Act cases. So now, if a police officer uses the phrase high crime area, he's going to leave his arrest vulnerable to a Racial Justice Act challenge.
This act is a fast-growing cancer within the heart of the California criminal justice system. It's already unwinding prosecutions and aiding criminals. Gangs are catching on to how they can use this tool to get sprung from prison. And California continues to fall deeper into its delusions, deeper into an ideology that ignores the true nature of crime and fuels real suffering.